In this video, I'm going to break down how AI works under the hood and how you can use it to make better decisions for your business and actually how to implement AI so that you can grow and scale. My name is Tommy. In case you don't know who I am, I've worked in the high ticket space for almost 4 years at this point. I work with a variety of different companies, sold millions online, and I've worked at one of the biggest and fastest growing AI companies in the world. And I don't say that to brag. I say that to let you know that what I'm talking about is proven, works, and can obviously help you with what you're ultimately looking to do with growing your business. And so in today's video, I'm going to break down a couple of different things that I feel would be helpful for business owners or for anybody who's interested in learning more about how AI can work and how you can use it for yourself. To do that, I need to first go into a first principles perspective of how AI works. The first thing I need to get out of the way is AI is not self-aware. It's not, it doesn't have goals unless you give it goals. And it doesn't really care about you or about anybody. It just follows the patterns that it has been told to follow. Which I guess that's the core of this is AI is a pattern recognition and implementing machine. Okay, well, how does that make sense for me in my business? Great question. So essentially, what has to happen is, here, I'll go ahead and kind of break some of this down. We all know the world has patterns. Like, whether we like it or not, nobody's like a completely unique snowflake. There are patterns in life. Just like 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4. Freaking, if you go to McDonald's and spend money, you'll be able to get the food that you would want. Maybe not all the time, but obviously you'll be able to buy food there. So that's a pattern that's true. How AI enhances things is it takes those patterns of how a process works, and then it is really good at analyzing the patterns and essentially building up this database of pattern recognition. And then what it's enabled to do once it has enough data is start to guess. It's able to guess before something happens. So based on the information and the patterns it's been given, it's able to guess what's going to happen in the future, which is why AI has exploded at the level that it has. Because in today's day and age, we are in the data age. We're in the information age. We have much more data because of the internet. On top of that, computers are getting much stronger. So we have a much better computing scale compared to 50 years ago when we first started to dabble and create AI with machine learning. The other thing too is the actual models we're using today are much more efficient than the ones were back in the day. So simply put, the reason why today AI is accelerating at the level it is compared to 50 years ago, nobody even heard about it unless you were literally a machine learning expert. It's because AI right now has more data, aka more patterns to do shit with. It has more brain power, and it's able to focus that better in terms of the guesses it can make and the tasks it can do. And so it's not quite, and it's probably never going to be, well, I mean, who knows? If it'll be able to start thinking for itself, if we train it how to think like a human, then maybe it could do that. But right now, it's not at that stage. So, okay, Tommy, how does that actually make sense for my business? Well, here's the deal. If you have a specific task, so if I got this little handy dandy line, and the AI has 0 patterns, 0 at-bats to see what's good and what's bad, it's not going to be a very good AI. It's not going to be a very good thing. However, if we give it, let's say, 1 million examples of what a good completed task is and the steps that it had to go through to make that happen, AI is very powerful because it can take this data here and then use it to guess what the best possible result is going to be based on the million examples it's been shown. And so if we think about any type of task that we need it to do, all we have to do to have an AI do it as good or better than a human is you just give it a shitload of examples. In fact, you probably on your first job or in your first, thing that you like to do, had to see what good looked like a bunch of times, and then you tried to copy it, you messed up, and then eventually you got your feet under you and you figured it out. The same thing is true when it comes to AI. Now, with that being the case, if we know that it can have patterns, recognition, that can make educated guesses, well, then it's just a matter of making sure that we keep it on the straight and narrow. I.e., if it messes up, we tell it messes up. And then it'll understand, oh, well, my best guess was wrong. Why? Oh, because of this stuff. So I'm going to remove it from my pattern decision making, and I'm going to add something else in there so that in the future I can make better guesses. So instead of 80% of the time I'm right, I'm like 98% of the time I'm right, type of a thing. And so that at a base level is AI. It's not magic. It's not a replacement for thinking. It's really just pattern recognition at a very high level with a lot of brain power, and it can predict based off of what it's been fed. Now, how that will translate into your business is if you give it a specific task or a goal. So if it's like, give me more cases or book more calls or summarize this Zoom video or, clean up my CRM or, categorize the data the way I need it to be categorized, as long as it knows the rules that it's supposed to follow, the pattern of what good looks like, and it has some software that can enable it to do what it does at a very high clip. So it takes like 0.1 seconds to go through and try one time, and then another 0.1 seconds to try a second time. You can see how I can get a million little spins done of what good and bad looks like and can learn and implement faster than a human. So that's when it's, a piece of AI or software stops being a chatbot and it becomes more like that employee you don't have to manage. Now, again, it can't think for itself. That's something that humans still have to do. But in terms of the actual doing and the speed of the actual process that humans would do on their own, AI can do that faster. So that's where, when people talk about, it's taking jobs, that's where it starts to feel like it's taking jobs. When you're doing a repetitive task over and over, and then an AI can just learn that task faster than the humans, and then can do it faster than the humans, and then it's like, well, why am I paying this human? So, if that makes sense. So that is from a first principles perspective. AI is prediction from data, action with speed without getting tired. Humans get tired. AI, which is basically math powered by energy, doesn't. And so that's ultimately what that's the case. And I don't know why this is an 8 here. Yes, I did use GPT to help me formulate my thoughts. So from a first principles perspective, there's 3 things. There's classification, i.e. AI can look at something, recognize other things it's seen before, and then put it into the right bucket. So if you get an email, is this email spam? Or if you have a phone call that comes your way, and then it talks to an AI chat person, it's like, what are you here to do? Oh, I need to talk with Steve about some case I'm working. It'll be able to hear that, compute it, and be like, okay, this is related to a case. I'm going to put him in this bucket. Or it's like, hey, I'm talking to him about some of his marketing stuff. He's like, okay, based on the 1,000 people I've heard before, the pattern recognition, this guy sounds like he's trying to sell Steve something. I'm going to put him in a different bucket. And so then that call gets routed somewhere else. But it first takes it, it listens, recognizes the pattern, guesses what's going to happen, and then it makes a decision and acts based on what the guess that it made. So the classification. So that's one use case. The other one is pattern recognition and prediction. Basically what I said of like, okay, we've seen 1,000 examples of what good looks like. It's kind of like when you're like, okay, once upon a, in your mind, what probably popped up is time. Well, why? Because once upon a time is a pattern as a kid you probably have heard hundreds of times before. So when I say once upon a, that pops in your brain. We're basically doing the same with AI. Except that instead of it being once upon a time, it's like, generate me 20 booked calls, or help me with these 50 cases, or how can I, or like, we've seen people put in their information for somewhere, let's get in contact with them immediately. That type of a thing. Or, here's like a perfect legal document, review it for me, make me another one, but for this dude. With the exact same tone and everything like that. Okay, and then you look at it as like, oh, you were 80% right, do it again. And then it's like, oh shoot, I messed up, and then it does it again. Now the last thing is generation, which this is a kind of what I just said before, where it, number one, can classify things, so it can recognize it and put it into a bucket. It can predict based on previous patterns what is, going to happen next, i.e. once upon a time. And then generation. Now, generation is essentially, okay, Here's the billion patterns that you have seen up to this point. I want you to use that information to create me something close to this set of instructions. Do your best. Now, mathematically, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the background, but when we look at it, it's like, why don't you generate me a cat that's flying in space on a banana? Okay, well, if you think back to like 2 years ago, that was something AI really couldn't do. Why? Because it didn't have enough data and enough like iterations of what good looked like. Now, if you do that in GPT or whatever you actually do it in, it will actually give you a very good example because of how exponentially fast AI is learning and growing. So the amount of patterns it has access to is a lot more, which therefore means that it can create things better than it did before. Which is why we can literally have Sora AI, which is making videos of people. Before it couldn't do that. Now it could because of how much additional data and computing power that we now have. And so now it can actually create stuff. Now, again, that's still something that's going to have to be refined, but those are the core things that AI can do. From a, okay, well, if it's not in, so from the problem side of it on my last video is like, what problem does it solve? From a doing the thing sort of perspective, a solution perspective, it can label stuff into categories. It can predict if it has enough data to learn from. And then if it has even more, it can sometimes get to the point where it can create things based on the patterns and the goal that we set for it. So book me 20 calls. If it knows the system or the pattern of how to get book calls, and it has use cases for each individual mini step that is learned to be able to do, then it can actually go out and then make that happen. It couldn't do that like 2 years ago. Now it kind of can with a little bit of oversight from humans. Okay, that's all fantastic, Tommy, but like, how does it actually work? Cool. So I had someone reach out and they're like, your video makes sense, but how does this work for like a law firm? Okay, fair enough. I know very little about law firms other than my friend who I am helping him when it comes to, he helps law firms when it comes to getting cases. But other than that, I don't know a huge amount. So this is what we're going to go through and walk through in terms of some of the specific use cases with the first principles that I just covered. So the first thing is law firms are basically the perfect fit for AI because most of their work has these traits. It's repetitive, rule-based, high stakes if you miss something, and then expensive when it's done manually. Okay, so repetitive. What is repetitive? It's a pattern. Well, here's the deal. If there's a pattern that we know what good looks like, that means an AI can be trained to do it and do it faster and do it better and do it more accurately, assuming there's a little bit of human oversight. So like I just mentioned before, like that's one of the core things it's able to do is predict based on a repeated pattern. Cool. Rules-based, basically the exact same thing. High stakes, meaning, okay, if you mess it up, that's a problem. So in some cases, you might be like, well, maybe I don't want an AI to do it. Well, I mean, if an AI can do it 90% as good, and then you have a human overseeing it, that means you don't need as many people doing it. You can have one person who's able to go through and then make sure that everything's good, and then you'll be fine. And then eventually you could get to the point where you've got the AI doing it here, and then there's another AI that's trained to see it and then make sure that it's better, and then you just have a human over top. So that's like AI teams, where you have like the base AI, you have a manager AI, and then you have a human overseeing it. Not to get too complex about that, but that's where we're progressing to. And then expensive when done manually. So if you need 50 people to do the specific job that is repetitive to do it right, obviously that costs money because people need to eat and it takes their time to be able to do it. So for those reasons, that's why law firms are really good in terms of AI use cases. So some of these are not familiar to me, but I'm going to walk through it essentially. So intake, aka getting cases in, this is through the front door of the firm. Potential clients call them, email them, fill out a form. Someone at the firm has to ask screening questions to see if it's a good case, collect facts, and obviously schedule a consult. That can be handled by an AI. Why? Because we know what a good case looks like. AI can qualify with screening questions because we know what good screening questions look like. And as long as it's able to do that effectively enough, you don't need a person to be, calling people to screen them. You can have the AI doing that. And then here's the thing. If A person who calls is busy. Obviously, you lose out on a case. So you can have an AI doing it 24/7. So there you go. 24/7 intake via chat, SMS, phone, ask qualifying questions, etc. That makes sense for you. Is this a viable case? It'll help decide that. Ultimately, it gives you faster responses, higher conversion of good cases, less time wasted on irrelevant leads, and then obviously your attorneys will spend more time on billable work, not screening random people. So this will be good, especially when you have high volume of cases. So another use case, document drafting for pleadings, motions, contracts, letters, etc. So the problem, a lot of legal writing is not from scratch. It's take this prior template and adapt it. Cool. Junior associates can burn hours editing, formatting, and customizing language. So where AI is going to help with this specific use case, drafting based off of past versions, again, predictive patterns, and then it'll be able to make engagement alerts. To be honest, half these things I don't really quite get, but you can tell I'm not a legal person. All these different things, especially if it's documented, again, it's a pattern of something that can be repeated and an AI can be trained on to do. And so it'll then learn the patterns and then it'll create it. And then you can just have people going over and then editing it as opposed to doing it from scratch. So you could say, take this legal template for this specific person with these 5 criteria and fill this out in a way that makes sense. And then you have a human look over it. And then eventually, once a human looks over it enough, they understand that pattern, then you can train an AI on that pattern, and then you have that base AI plus the overseeing managing AI, and then you have the human on top. So, obviously you can push, work down without losing quality, move faster. When the other, side sends something, you need to respond the same day. Flat fee work becomes more profitable because you don't need to spend time doing it. The AI does it. So there you go. Research, case study, law support. This is figuring out what precedent supports our argument, i.e. doing legal research. Now, for this one might need to be a little bit more careful with how you do it, because depending on what AI you use, or how the system itself is built, sometimes AI can what's called hallucinate. And hallucinate is where it does something that sounds good to fit your pattern, but actually isn't true. So not to go, again, too far into the weeds into that, but essentially, if you've got a case, actually, I think there was an actual specific case where this happened, where there was like a judge somewhere who ruled that because of these 2 things that happened in 1980 something, I'm overturning this case. But the problem is he GPT'd it, and then GPT just came up with an answer that sounded good, but it wasn't actually true. So then in the court case, he ended up having to go back on what he said and then give the other person what they wanted from the ruling, basically. Again, you can tell I'm not a legal guy. So that's obviously that. Might have to be a little bit more careful. But so this will give you... Oh, okay. That's literally what I just said. It has to be verified sources. Cool. So if this is verified sources and you have a pattern for how you like to get research done and to get your stuff, it'll make things faster just overall. Case management, deadlines, and compliance. Law's full of if we miss this date, we're dead. Okay. Deadlines for these, manually reaching out where AI helps. It's going to read court notices, flag uncertainty, etc. Discovery evidence review. In litigation, discovery is brutal because there's mountains of documents, emails, and messages, etc. Problem today, humans have to review, tag, summarize what's relevant. It's mind-numbing, high volume, expensive. Where AI helps, bulk classify documents. Again, going back to here, it can help classify and label stuff. Summarize long emails. So again, going through it and then essentially classifying it down. And so summarizing it, basically. What's the gist of what we're talking about? And then pull out the specific timelines. So it cuts down your review time, builds narratives on what happened in what order way faster, and frees attorneys to think strategy instead of doing the actual like nuts and bolts day-to-day stuff. Client communication status updates. No one tells me what's going on. That can obviously be largely automated. And so this will obviously help protect your time, which is important to do what really matters as opposed to going through and manually talking with people. So this is something that can also be largely taken care of by AI. Billing and timekeeping, billable hours. Time tracking is annoying and easy to screw up. Attorneys can log their time or forget to log their time. And so that's something that doesn't help. And so essentially AI can help as long as you have something that keeps track of it, you can have AI basically like categorize that for you. So you can invoice faster, and then as a result of that, cash flow improves, and you're not wasting time just freaking combing through shit. Marketing, reputation, lead generation. Obviously, law is extremely competitive. Firms struggle to produce helpful content consistently, and so this would be more so like content creation, like marketing, how that would work. And so this is actually a very, very, very powerful use case. I have experience doing this for myself as well as for others. And so it helps you basically get more cases, more qualified leads, build more trust before your call, and make it so that way by the time, with the right sort of marketing process using AI, you can increase the overall amount of cash flow you get just because people, number one, more of them get to that stage. They're warmer, and because of both of those things, more of them convert for you, which is really good for cash flow. So I'm not going to go too deep into that because, I mean, it's a no-duh thing. If you're curious about specifically how that would work, you can ask, and I might go deeper into it if there's a specific thing you're curious about. And this is another good one. So if you're bringing on someone new, a junior person, having an internal database, oh my gosh, so useful. Because the problem with GPT is that you can put your stuff on there and you can use it, but the data is not private to you, which can be dangerous depending on what specific thing you're doing, especially if you've got NDAs or other stuff like that. So for me, what makes a lot of sense is basically having your own version of GPT away from GPT's databases and where they can look at the data, but it's an internal GPT trained on all your stuff. And because that's very specific to your law firm or whatever it happens to be, and because of that, like, you get the power of GPT without compromising your trade secrets, which is important. And that means that you get to train people faster. You get to answer questions faster. If there's somebody specific who you want to give access to who's not inside of your firm, let's say they're like a client or someone you're working with, and you want them to be able to answer their own questions without talking to you, you could give them like an externalized version of this specifically for their case or whatever the specific engagement you have with them is, so that they don't have to constantly bug you with where are we with this. They can just ask and then they'll get an answer. And then that decreases time you have to spend talking to people. You can focus on more productive activities, whatever that specifically happens to be. Now, we should probably talk about the other side of it. Where does AI not replace lawyers or the work that lawyers do? So it's not showing up to court for you. Obviously, you have to do that. It's not dictating or deciding your negotiation strategy. It's not taking ethical responsibility for your legal advice. And it's not telling you, this is the legal risk you should or shouldn't take. It doesn't shield you from that sort of, blowback if you get something wrong. And so it's still your judgment call. These are still human calls. What AI does do is it removes the repetitive mechanical admin, formatting, summarizing, scheduling, drafting, a lot of just day-to-day pattern stuff that has to be done. And it allows you instead to put more of your time into the actual strategy. So you keep doing lawyer brain stuff, and AI eats the legal operation chaos, basically. So if you say it even simpler, law firms sell expert judgment. Everything that is not expert judgment is overhead, and AI can destroy that. So hopefully that makes sense. I know that my intention is to make this as simple as possible, and if it isn't simple, then let me know. I'll try to redo this and make it a little bit simpler yet. But I thought that what would help you is going through creating from a more generic, high level, what AI is capable of doing, and then simplify that down, and then give it a specific use case. And then cover, again, kind of bouncing between the two, what you can do and how you can think about stuff. Because as long as you have the data, the right engine, and you have the bandwidth in terms of computing power, which at this point most people do, you can actually create a pattern recognition process to predict and then eventually start generating the things that you want it to generate. And so that's where it becomes very powerful. Because at every step in a business, there is a process, there is a pattern. And if you can train on each of those individual patterns, it may not, let's say, for the sake of argument, you need to create, a draft of some sort of thing. Well, that's one specific, use case. But if, to be honest, to effectively do a case, there's probably 50 things that have to happen. And each one of those 50 things has a specific pattern. Well, if the AI is trained on each one of those patterns and you combine them all together, then you kind of have this mega AI that'll do each of these individual things, have the overall pattern make sense, and that's where you can be like, solve this case for me or build this thing for me. And the AI will be able to do that as opposed to just getting stuck here, which then the humans have to kind of like fix it and then make it work and then keep the pattern going. If that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, please let me know. And hopefully this is helpful. If it wasn't helpful, please let me know as well. I want to make sure this is simplified. If it isn't, I'll redo it and then make everybody happy and be on the same page. Otherwise, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you have any additional topics you want me to cover, please let me know. And I look forward to talking with you soon.